Hello, world singers. My name is Tyler.
And my name is Brooke.
And this is
Cosmere Conversations. Here it is. The episode we've all been waiting for.
And mainly just we, Brooke and I, because, oh boy, it's Taravangian, or his new name,
Taravodium.
We know there's another one out there, which, you know.
Is there?
Yeah, Todium.
Oh, I hate
exactly.
that.
Sorry for the folks who are all into Todium, but we are on the Taravodium bandwagon.
I particularly like Taravodium because it also kind of has the word terror in it,
and
which is
terrified.
how I feel.
Exactly. That's a great point. It would be better if all words had the feeling that they were meant to invoke
Absolutely.
in you. And terror is probably the best description for how I felt at the end of Rhythm of War. You had kind of the dual terrible endings or terrifying endings in that Taravangian becomes Odium and then he gets won over on everyone's favorite and most powerful character that we know of, Hoid. And he basically, we think, erases part of Hoid's memory, at least about that instance.
Okay, but we're not going to go into that in this episode.
Because
obviously
there is a series now that involves all the things that Taravodium has done and touches and is a part of. So in this episode, what are we going to kind of go over and look at?
We are kind of going to focus in on Taravangian's timeline specifically in sort of the setup, how Taravangian is set up to become Odium. So like Taravangian, the man before, and then his ascension to Odium, because that's a huge moment in which we learn a ton of stuff about shards and vessels and power, blah, blah, blah. And then we are going to take a look at some potential paths that maybe Taravangian will go down in the future.
And specifically, we are going to avoid in this episode talking about that very epic epilogue with Hoid and talking about speculation about the deal with Dalinar specifically.
Yeah, there's a lot about... Odium's doing a lot in this book, but the bulk of the deal is not made with Taravodium, it's made with Resa Odium, so that's going to be a whole separate thing.
We are really just trying to keep it specific and focused on Taravangian and
where he came from, who he is now, where he's going.
And so let us dive deep into the pool that is Taravangian.
Taravangian is such an interesting and complex character, and we've had quite a bit of time with him on screen, and yet I still have so many questions about like who exactly he is and what his actual like goals and desires are.
Always seen as a mystery, a scene stealer. Each time that he was revealed, or part of his character was revealed in the very first book, Way of Kings, he was just a character that we wanted to know more about. He comes off first as
so
like this
mysterious. He's an enigma.
Ruler of a powerful city, Kharbranth, where Yasna is, and there is this kind of moment where he's trying to save his niece, I believe, maybe granddaughter.
I think it's his granddaughter.
But he is, portrayed as this very kind character. And then, of course, we get the reveal by the end of that book that he is, in fact, far more scheming, far more prepared, and far more willing to be kind of like a utilitarian of Rashar, or like the most single-minded person we realize in this greater war of Rashar. Taravangian is a huge threat, and then he just continues his manipulation, his workings on Dalinar and the Coalition throughout the next book. But by the time we get to Rhythm of War, he's kind of on the outs. He's been discovered, quote unquote, as a not 100% supportive of Dalinar and the Coalition. He like backed out before the end of the Oathbringer fight.
They know that he like actively backstabbed them.
Yeah, 100%. But he's still like
not passive.
I just want to like set up where he is. He is still part of the Coalition. He is still a ruler of his people and is like, we are more united against Odium, but we really just are using Taravangian, is what the other characters think. They're like keeping on the outs, but they need him still close by. But he himself is deteriorating rapidly because of his boon/curse that I did in quotation marks from cultivation that really, we don't know what's going on with that.
There's an interesting parallel because he is also getting older, and typically when humans get older, we tend to decline both physically and mentally. And Taravangian is finding that not only is he like naturally aging, but he is also having fewer and fewer smart days and more frequent stupid days magically.
And by the time we get to the end of Rhythm of War, he will be at his dumbest day.
Yeah.
And even so far as it being compared to the reverse of his most intelligent day, like on the opposite end of that extreme spectrum, is we always heard about this one brilliant day, and then we get the one stupid day, and it's actually the one that is most important. Maybe something that Cultivation was keeping an eye on. She was planning for just such a situation. We'll talk more about Cultivation's dealings with Taravangian a little bit later. Let's start with Odium itself, or Rasa Odium.
Yeah, and we hear a lot of interesting things while Rasa is still holding the shard of Odium about the relationship between that vessel and that shard. Specifically, one of the interludes. Oh man, the interludes in this book were so incredible. But one of them is from the perspective of Ja-Anat. And she says, quote, "She felt a surging to the power that moved within him. The mind did not like being questioned, but the power, it liked questions. It liked arguments. It was passion. There was weakness here in the division between the vessel and the shard." End quote.
Now, that's not the only example of setting up a division within Odium, the shard, and Rasa, the vessel, that we see. We also have Harmony's letter to Hoyd that you and I talked about in detail in our epigraph episode. Check that out for like our full quotations and thoughts on that.
And those thoughts are much more broad. Like Sazed presents that theory, big picture.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that from Ja-Anat, we get this really specific example of a specific thing that differs in between the person and the shard. I just think that's really helpful to have that example to sort of start wrapping our minds around what exactly the relationship is there and how they differ.
And you are talking about that piece of the quote that the mind, Rasa, does not like being questioned, but the power does like questions.
Yeah.
As a reflection of questions come from a source of passion, a desire to want to know something and know more knowledge. And that's something that Odium, the shard, seems to like, and Rasa does not.
Yeah, Rasa by nature, I think, is more authoritarian.
Yes. I love that idea, and it's not the only quote that we get from Ja-Anat.
Ja-Anat is very observant. She has some excellent observations here. Another one, quote, "The power behind him is strong, but his mind is exposed. The mind and the power seek different goals. This leaves him not weak, but vulnerable." End quote.
And that's a huge question that we've had about Odium generally. What are his goals?
Yeah.
And it's just been driving the speculation throughout the early part of the series.
I'm so curious what precisely are Odium's goals, and then what precisely are Rasa's goals, and like in everything that we have seen of Odium up until now, how much of that is Odium and how much of that is Rhaesa?
It's hard to kind of guess because of the way that Rhaesa eventually is dispatched by Nightblood and Taravangian. I think that there has to be a question that we have also mentioned briefly before in our just general overview, but the idea that Rhaesa the Vessel was failing the goal of Odium the Shard, and that maybe Odium the Shard was like, well, time to go. Not having that specific of thought. I don't want to give too much personification to the Shard, but just like the general concept of the Odium has a goal. Ja'ana is clearly saying that.
Yeah.
And it seems Rhaesa as the Vessel was not achieving that goal.
Yeah, and I know I've said this on the podcast before, but I feel like it is either that the Shard and the Vessel are very closely aligned, which is something that Hoyd has said, and therefore Rhaesa is becoming subsumed by the power, or if like the Shard and the Vessel are coming further apart in their intents, and that's what is weakening him.
I think that could be the case, especially with the failure at the end of Oathbringer, that may have established a psychic break, just to use a word like that, between
there's actually
Odium and Rhaesa.
There's a quote that expounds upon that we're going to get to later on down the line. I think that this also starts to introduce the fact that the character that we have relied upon very heavily up until now to provide real information that is, big picture, capital C, Cosmere, unbiased, aka Hoyd, who is like, has been sort of the fount of all knowledge. Like, Hoyd is so old. He's been around. He's not, particular to one world. He knows the whole Cosmere, so he knows what's going on. Let's listen to everything Hoyd says. And I think in Rhythm of War, we start to see how fallible Hoyd is.
Yeah.
And, can we really trust his perception and opinions about Rhaesa from thousands of years ago? That might not really be valid intelligence anymore. And so I think we kind of have to take all of that with a grain of salt.
We should also recognize that this is something that Brandon has done in other books and other stories.
Yes.
That the source of your knowledge is flawed, and our knowledge, as you're saying, comes a lot from Hoyd.
I know.
But
and
what if that is flawed?
We thought Hoyd was above it all. But I feel like, no, I fell into the trap again.
Yeah, exactly. We have the examples of Frost in the couple of scenes that we have seen with those two interacting. Frost is very clearly saying the same warning that you are projecting. It's like, you don't know as much as you think you do. You're too involved, and you are seeking power beyond your station. Like, if we just take Frost at his word, maybe Frost is right and Hoyd is wrong, but we want to support Hoyd partially because he's a storyteller, and
we're starved for information,
and he dishes it out in beautiful prose and poetry, and like, it's great to follow that train. But we have to admit that these characters, be they Hoyd or Shards, are flawed, and that is summarized most clearly by this quote. Quote, Odium had incredible power. That was clear. He was God in power, but in mind he was a man. End quote. I think that this not only applies to Odium and Rhaesa, it also applies now to Odium and Taravangian and every other character of incredible power. It could be Harmony, it could be Autonomy, it could be any of our super invested characters, like maybe a Dalinar down the road does something crazy and also is in a position of great power. But we have seen Dalinar's flaws, and clearly he's progressed, and characters can progress, and that's cool. But like, we should always admit that our characters, no matter how powerful, are filled with flaws.
Along the lines of sort of that human aspect of the shards, we have this quote, Odium has greatly expanded intelligence, but he feels the same way a man does, end quote. And I think this is the perfect sort of example of exactly how cultivation has set up Taravangian to become a god, to like prepare him for this ascension, because she both expands his intelligence and deepens his experience of human emotions.
Yeah, I think that she says that specifically, the idea of that Taravangian was on this path and she was just trying to provide a little bit of pruning, as she did with other characters, but to just set him up in order to be a better vessel, a better potential vessel for the Shard of Odium.
Which is really interesting. I'm very interested to see if her pruning actually does lead to a better result. Like, whatever that means, whatever a better vessel for a shard looks like, I wonder if Taravangian will be that.
Because right now it seems like cultivation is the like sly long-term player. You know, everyone else is playing checkers. Cultivation's playing chess. She is thinking 10 steps ahead. She is pruning these characters.
She's definitely playing the long game.
Yeah, but what if, to keep it in perspective, we should also say she is flawed as well and may not be actually making moves that are going to work every single time. I could see it like working out with Dalinar and not working out with Taravangian, but we have to wait and see for those types of reveals.
And we'll talk more about their specific interaction.
There's another key aspect that we have now seen in multiple books dating back to Taravangian's diagram, where Renarin and possibly other characters with future sight throw wrinkles into the preconceived plans of the shards, where for the reveal of Taravodium, we have also a known weakness that's already apparent in Renarin, because it's the same weakness that blacked out Renarin from the sight of Odium. We should assume that that applies to Taravangian as well.
Yeah, I thought this parallel was really interesting. Like, we've been drawing all these parallels between Odium and Taravangian, and I think we can kind of throw Renarin in there too. For example, Renarin says, quote, I think Odium might see like I do, not events or the world itself, but possibilities, end quote.
Now, we know that Renarin is a truth watcher, but that his spren was corrupted by Ja'ana.
Yes.
And therefore, it should be the case that Renarin is in maybe a unique position to scramble the plans of Odium.
Yeah, I would think that we know that there are other truth watchers, not very many, but there are some.
Now is the most obvious other one by the end of the book.
Well, no, but there's just regular truth watchers. Navani mentions it.
Non-corrupted.
Correct.
Excellent.
Yeah. Regular old truth watchers.
Mm-hmm.
So I would think that Renarin would be able to tell if those truth watchers played and messed with future sight in the same way that Renarin does. And he doesn't mention that. He's quite specific that he in particular is kind of messing up the ability to see into the future of anyone who can see into the future, including Renarin.
So it might actually be that the corrupted spren truth watchers are the key, maybe because of being able to bridge the gap between or use both void light and storm light. There could be some,
who knows?
But importantly, we'll talk about the introduction of more corrupted truth watcher spren in a second. But I think that this is also similar to Scadrial in a way with its god metal Atium. Atium, of course, when taken by the users, gives them a bit of future sight, and the ability to see the possible movements, but then when that is counteracted by another person using atium, the possible futures become too complicated to understand. Basically, described as spiraling out into like millions and billions of different possible futures. And so it just nullifies everything.
Yeah.
And that could be the way that characters like Renarin, maybe other corrupted Truth Watchers, are forcing a nullification of the future sight powers.
I think that's a great point and a great comparison to make, that Renarin is sort of leveling the playing field in a similar way to HEM.
I hope so. And Renarin actually plays a important pivotal role in Taravangian's ascension, maybe even setting up the idea that Renarin knew or had some future sight of what was going to happen on this day.
Yeah, I don't know. This whole sequence is interesting, and I have some questions about it because this is all happening super cut up in between all of the other things that are happening, between Dalinar talking to Ishar, Navani almost dying and saving the tower.
Yeah, it's a Sanders avalanche plus Taravangian becomes Odium.
Kaladin like almost, descending into darkness. And then there's also this setup. And so I kind of went through and just read these Taravangian like little chunks all together to sort of put this together. So Ja'anat appears to Taravangian, and he tells her that he is trying to figure out a way to summon Odium for his plan to get Odium and Zeth in the same place. Zeth, is like not having it. And so Taravangian's trying to figure out a way to trick him into just happening to be in the same place at the same time as Odium so that he can use Nightblood to possibly kill Odium. And so Ja'anat is like, cool, down with that plan. I will arrange for some of my children, her corrupted spren, to be sent to him because that will help lure Odium to him. That's really all she says. She's like, don't worry, I'll take care of it. I'll send you some spren.
And to me, that jumps out as Odium is on the lookout for her corrupted spren.
Correct.
I'm guessing because he already knows what Renarin is doing and like messing with stuff, and he doesn't want any more corrupted Truth Watchers out there.
Yeah, and he kind of suspects that Ja'anat is not fully on his side. Yeah, so he is keeping watch for those spren as a way to, see what she's up to.
Of course, Taravangian is also experiencing his dumbest days as all of this is happening. So this is like the day before Ascension and then the day of Ascension, and he's
basically never smart anymore. He's always somewhere on the dumb scale.
So when we're talking about Taravangian trying to trick Odium, it is with the mind that literally is crying at the struggle to read basic words. Just like a sentence takes him minutes to just parse out the very basic
I think
definition.
that's his dumbest day, but
he's real low.
He's not the best critical thinker
which
at the moment.
I think means that it is important that all these other characters have been like pushed in the right direction to see Taravangian and then to help him out. Like, I think it's all connected. And
I think, that's actually really interesting because Taravangian, like his existence with this boon/curse keeps begging the question of like, which one is better? Which one is more effective? Would he have been as effective in getting other people to help him if he was, smart and wily and crafty? Or is he succeeding because he is more in touch with his emotions and like probably better at relating to others,
And probably creating a dichotomy between the two, where think of the way that he was introduced to the coalition in Oathbringer. Yes, he was playing a role. It was a role that he could play because of his boon and curse and the nature of his moments of intelligence and leadership, and he had conversations with different individuals when they came away and they're like, Taravangian, he's got some things going on. But then on other days, he appears so weak, sometimes, struggling to even comprehend what a meeting of the monarchs is doing or talking about, that I think it like creates this sense of like wanting to help, almost like a pity, I guess, but like a desire for other characters to help, be like, no, he's okay, even though he betrayed them at the end, and still they're kind of like keeping him around as just like, well, that was the conniving because he's so weak at some point.
I don't know. I think they keep him around just because they need like his armies and stuff.
But a lot of people continue to keep Taravangian around, and I think part of it is about this idea of like, in weakness, it's hard to like strike someone down. Think of someone beating up like an old man or a Renarin-esque character.
Yeah.
Like you have those Adolin types who are wanting to protect, and the Kaladin types who are wanting to protect. And I think there's some urge to protect the weaker side of Taravangian, and then like you said, that allows him to achieve more than he otherwise would.
Yeah.
So like in weakness, there is actual greater potential.
The next time we come back to Taravangian in all of this jumble of things happening, he wakes up on his stupidest day, immediately recognizes that he is the dumbest he's ever been, and goes over to this basket of food that has been dropped off for him. Inside the basket is a note that has Renarin's seal on it and a couple of spheres, gemstones with corrupted spren inside of them. The note from Renarin, well, ostensibly from Renarin. We don't actually see Renarin write this note. It just has his seal on it. So I do want to just like
introduce
put
a little
tiny seed of doubt and just say, we don't actually literally know that Renarin wrote this, but it says, I'm sorry.
So the question then begs, like, what does Renarin have to be sorry about, except for the only thing that Renarin can do, which is see the future?
So, yeah, I really want to know what happens like in between those two sections.
Mm-hmm.
I assume that Ja'anat went to Renarin, said, hey, we need to send some corrupted spren to Taravangian. Please do that. And then
Renarin saw the consequences of that.
Okay, but what did he see? Did he see yeah, exactly. Did he see Taravangian ascending? Did he see Taravangian dying at the hands of Odium? Did he see Taravangian dying at the hands of Szeth? Did he see Szeth at all? Like,
yeah, we have no idea what provoked him to say, I'm sorry.
What did he think
was
doing?
Yeah,
is my question.
My assumption, and it is just that, an assumption, is that he saw the path to ascension and the corresponding horror that burden is going to put on Taravangian. Like, I think he's actually sorry.
Taravangian is happy to ascend. Why would Renarin be sorry for that?
Because Renarin is not happy to see suffering or harm come to anyone. And I feel like he's saying, I'm sorry for my role in this. I'm sorry for what's going to happen to you, Taravangian who becomes Taravodian.
I don't think so.
You introduced another idea, though, that it could be another Truth Watcher, another servant of Ja'anat, and the only one that we know about right now is Relaine. This could have been his coming out party, like doing something for Ja'anat.
No.
We have no idea.
This is definitely before Relaine gets a spren. And not that Ja'anat doesn't necessarily have other people, but yeah, I don't know. Listeners, please tell me what you think Renarin is sorry for.
Yeah. What we know is that day of ascension for Taravangian comes on his dumbest day, and Szeth shows up with Nightblood as Ja'anat has put these spheres, which she knows or believes will trigger Odium to come. And so the thing that was desired is all happening. And if Cultivation also saw this as an possible end result for Taravangian, then this is the longest running con on Odium that has ever existed. We're talking like at least decades of this very specific con. You could make arguments it's even longer, but like this con has been going on for a while and now is the final day of the con.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's absolutely what Cultivation was doing. I don't know if she, specifically planned, oh, it's going to be Szeth with Nightblood in the house.
It's going to be Taravangian with Nightblood at the behest of Szeth, who's real angry about his dad.
Yeah, but she was and has been grooming Taravangian to take Odium since he came to see her, period. In the moment of Ascension, there are so many interesting quotes that are just packed full of great information. This moment is the most detailed and specific look at the actual process of ascending that we have so far in the Cosmere.
There are a couple of other examples that you can point to, but they are definitely less detailed.
Yeah, they're so much more broad of just
exactly.
Vin took the power and saw across the land.
Yeah.
And you're like, what does that really mean? Like, it took me, I had to read that part when Vin ascends a couple times. Like, I wasn't really sure what was going on. I was like, wait, what's happening?
And
what
I believe
exactly
that's intentional in those moments because it happens with Kelsier. It happens with a lot of our characters who just get glimpses of power, including Dalinar or Wax or XYZ. It's just kind of vague power overwhelmingness.
Well, and I think part of that anyway is that most of those characters are ascending in like really action-packed moments. Like Vin's in the middle of a battle and like trying to save Ellen's life. So she's not really thinking about what exactly is happening to her and like processing everything. She's, busy doing stuff.
But Taravangian is already a very like calculating and methodical person, and so it really makes sense that his ascension is also the most detailed we have. So let's read some of the quotes from that moment.
Quote, "The figure that contained Odium's power, the person who controlled it, evaporated, taken by the sword. That alone was so much investiture that Taravangian felt the sword go dull in his fingers, full, lethargic. As when a hot brand was shoved into a barrel of water, there was an initial hiss, but this power was too vast for the sword to drink. It killed the person holding that power, however, which left a hole, a need, a vacuum, like a gemstone suddenly without stormlight." End quote.
So as we saw from the very first set of epigraphs and Navani's lecture on fabrial mechanics, the vacuum created when investiture is rapidly pulled out from some type of vessel, whether it be a gemstone or a shard, is so potent that it will bring in whatever is nearby. And in this case, Taravangian has been, when he does so, when he actually ascends, this is what he has to say. And what I think is truly one of the more terrifying things from the book. Quote, "The power reached out, and Taravangian felt a distinct connection to it. Passion, hatred. Today, Taravangian was only passion. Hatred, fear, anger, shame, awe, bravery. The power loved these things, and it surged around him, enveloping him.
'Take me,' the power pled, speaking not in words, but in emotion. 'You are perfect. I am yours.'" End quote.
For the very first time that I'm aware of in the Cosmere, we get a shard, or the power of a shard, having thoughts and commands and like is
similar
speaking to someone.
The Dawn Shard,
Yes,
I guess, because
yeah.
we do hear the Dawn Shard speak. But yeah, very interesting, especially saying that Taravangian is perfect. And I think that this is, exactly what we've been talking about with Taravangian for probably years at this point, which is like, was his smart day the most important, or is his dumb day the most important? And I think the answer is both. However, I do wonder if Taravangian would have even been able to take the shard if he was not so stupid in this day and therefore so filled with emotion.
I wonder if it is really just speaking to the ego of Taravangian, which we know is big. The man carries around a hefty ego. I think that the shard, every word of it, to me is just like, it makes me cringe. It makes me just like feel like someone's looking at me from behind, just the bad feelings, bad mojo. But take me. The power is doing the taking. Like, Taravangian's not in control of this process, but the first thing the power says is like, no, you can choose to do this. You can take me.
I don't think that's accurate. Brandon has called them vessels for a reason. I think you are totally right with what you were saying before and comparing the vessel to a gemstone, which is also a vessel for power. So like I think that ultimately it's a two-way street. I think that the power and the vessel come into an intimate relationship where they are not entirely one thing and they have to sort of
symbiotic.
Work together and negotiate with each other to a certain extent. I don't think the power could just take him on its own. There had to be some acquiescence from Taravangian. It had to be a two-way street.
You need to kind of give permission.
Yes, you have to invite it into the home first.
I think that that's obviously correct, that this is definitely a symbiotic relationship between the vessels and the shard. I just find it so...
It feels gross.
It does feel gross.
It's really like slimy, icky feeling.
Yeah, and I think that the concept of these two things working together is exactly as we mentioned before. It's just like, this is the worst possible setup, is when the mind and the power's intent are unified in their creepiness.
Yeah,
and
that's when
now
you really have to worry.
Exactly.
Once Taravangian ascends, we then get like a whole series of him sort of processing that experience, which gives us some super interesting things and more insight into that relationship between vessel and shard. And I think it's interesting that Taravangian even gets insight into like the mind of Reza. Like there's some sort of lingering cognizance that
100%.
Taravangian now has access to, that I thought was really interesting and like didn't really expect that.
Well, I mean, just going on romantic theory, we would assume that there is a cognitive shadow hanging around of Reza, or did that all get sucked into Nightblood?
Yeah, I think Reza is just gone, but there does seem to be some kind of like whisper or like imprint, I guess, because the power would remember, like the power knew every single thing about Reza. Yeah, and so Taravangian still has access to all of that, those thoughts and feelings.
And those insights that you're talking about really do put in perspective the things that Ja'anat was saying earlier, that cultivation must have realized, which is why she was doing all this pruning and all this work and all this setup, is she had to see these same weaknesses that now Taravangian is voicing. Yeah,
so here we get back to, this is the quote we were talking about at the beginning. Quote, "He saw that his predecessor had been sliding toward oblivion for a long, long time. Weakened by his battles in the past, then deeply wounded by honor, this being had been enslaved by the power. Failing to claim Dalinar and then losing the tower and Stormblessed had left the being frail, vulnerable. But the power was anything but frail. It was the power of life and death, of creation and destruction, the power of gods. In his specific case, the power of emotion, passion, and, most deeply, the power of raw, untamed fury, of hatred unbound." End quote.
Again, setting up more terrifyingness. Hatred unbound, untamed fury.
Yeah, I think this answers the question of like, what actually is odium? Is it really hatred, or is it maybe passion? And like, maybe it's fine. Maybe it's not as bad as we think. I think this is pretty clearly like, no, it's definitely hatred.
Yeah, it's untamed fury. And I think that that is so interesting because, you know, if we just take normal human experience, like what is the thing that causes older people, just regular old humans, to become less passionate and less maybe exciting as they were when they were young? So often it is the difficulty or the failures that they have experienced in their life that makes them more and more cautious. When you're young, you can be passionate about stuff because like you've never known failure. Like go out there, kids, seek a brand new world, do something crazy, but like use your passion and your emotion to drive you forward. But then if you've had a long, hard life and your body's old and frail and you're not as sharp as you once were and you knew it, you can like hear people talking and you're like, I don't understand the internet, my friend. I think that there's like, you pull back into your shell. So that's what I think is happening to Reza. He's had all of these experiences. He's old and he has just been slowly pulling back, trying to protect himself like in a cocoon. And untamed fury is not going to be checked like that. It's like, go full bore. I need someone new, someone passionate. Reza, I think, has lost a step.
I think that's a little bit ageist. I'm just going to say for our older podcast audience. But I do understand what you're saying. I also wonder, okay, Reza tries all of these things, fails in a bunch of different ways. Obviously, as a human, we're impacted by our failures. That doesn't feel great. And I wonder if like the hatred and fury of the power can turn on the vessel.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is Reza, you know, like, is that hatred and fury also directed at him?
Yeah.
Or is he only able to like wield it outward? I've never really thought about that before, but I feel like if it can be turned on Reza, that would not be a good position to be in. Like, if you are holding the shard of fury and then you keep failing at what it wants you to do, bad situation.
So I guess there is a worry, a tiny fear, and that we kind of addressed earlier, or at least mentioned, that while we think cultivation has set this all up and it's been this like real long con of odium, maybe the reality of the situation is Odium the Shard got real angry and was like, oh, look, over there, weakness, the possibility to get rid of one vessel and replace it with another, and then just, I don't want to give too much personification to the shard, but just like pushed Reza that in that direction and then watched what happened. Like maybe this is exactly what Odium Untamed Fury wants, is to be in the possession of Taravangian.
I think it's less of a crafty manipulation on the part of Odium, and I think it says more about the short-sightedness and mistakes of cultivation. In that, like, she thought that she was setting up this great long con, but she actually did not really succeed at what she thought she was doing.
Exactly. And I have to imagine that she couldn't ever predict what would happen after Taravangian ascended.
Of course. Yeah. She was just like, I'm doing my best. This seems good.
Yeah.
Great idea, me.
Might not be great,
and
but
it's like,
it could be better than what
honey.
we have now. Yeah.
Oh, honey. And we will
you
get
just
we will get
honeyed
to the
an ancient dragon.
Yeah, we'll get there. Some more sort of insights on the nature of vessel and shard. This is from Ja'anat from earlier, but it's an interesting, again, observation about this relationship. Quote, she didn't fully understand the laws that bound him. They were ancient and related to compacts between the shards, the high gods of the Cosmere. Odium wasn't simply the mind that controlled the power, the vessel, nor was he merely that power alone, the shard. He was both, and at times it seemed the power had desires that were counter to the purposes of the vessel. End quote.
let's take that and go right into a quote from Taravangian after he has ascended
Yes.
that shows this duplicity, or this, I want to say like yin and yang in the best of circumstances, but this is more like,
It's like a negative yin and yang.
quote, he was free to destroy, to burn, to wreak havoc and terror upon those who had doubted him. No, free to plan, to devise a way to save the world from itself. He could see so far, see so much. He needed to think, to burn, no, to plot, to, end quote. There's this inability for him to even get through a thought or two along the lines of planning, plotting, trying to save the world before being interrupted.
Yeah, he's like constantly being barraged with these desires to just destroy everything.
Yeah. And I find it interesting because obviously we've seen a little bit of that from Ruin on Scadrial and that kind of desire to destroy. And this is specific in the idea of like wreaking havoc and terror. Ruin was always undercut with that little bit of like, hey, bro, this is just the way of the universe.
Well, I think the thing about Ruin is that as he describes the intent of the shard as something like entropy, it has within it built in a sense of time and slow decay. So it doesn't really matter what, how fast that happens or when it happens. As far as Ruin is concerned, every second of every day, things are dying and we're getting closer to the period of nothingness. So like Ruin's doing its job.
Yeah, he just doesn't want the Ruin to stop, which is what preservation wants,
exactly.
Obviously. But
versus Odium, who is just like, now, right?
Havoc,
like
terror,
that
burn.
passion of like, this needs to happen right now.
And that is always terrifying. The suddenness
it's
of change.
basically a toddler. Odium is a toddler.
Oh, that's a great point. The Cosmere's toddler, Odium.
Just like all emotion, no sense of like humanity or relationship to others, just complete emotion now. I want what I want and I want it now. And if you don't give it to me, I will tear this mother to the ground.
Yeah, some of our parents can let us know. We do not have a toddler, but I've heard terrible twos.
I have
Is it like 2 to 4?
Toddler.
2 to 6? I don't know when the ages are.
Oh
I don't know what the ages are when they are the most focused on what you just described, that inability to recognize other people. Obviously, at some point, it kind of like kicks in and the brain develops in that different way of like being able to recognize that others exist.
Yeah.
For some people, it takes them to adulthood. For some people, their parents are like putting them in a good spot, so they're developing quicker.
Yeah, I think from like childhood development, it is like 2 and 3 years old where your brain really doesn't have a way to like comprehend, like have any kind of empathy or really even sympathy for other humans, which is why like toddlers will slap you in the face and like they don't understand that hurts. Like they truly don't have a concept of it
because it doesn't hurt them.
Exactly.
Like it's very clear. I can hit you as many times as I want, and
this is fine.
The only thing in pain is my hand from hitting you so hard, so I won't do it forever. But like they don't. And that's such an interesting idea of comparing that to Odium, because they also, or all of the shards also lack the other shards. They are, by their nature of this division into 16, they are in an imbalance, much like a toddler is. They're not where they need to be as a full adult. They're imbalanced and they're going through a process. Odium's stuck there.
There's a quote from one of the letters that says something like, I'm really disappointed that so few of the original shards have kept to our initial pact to remain separate. And like, you have Roshar that has 3 shards on it and Scadrial that had 2 shards on it and like all of these. And I wonder if that is sort of why the shards like gravitated together, because they sort of recognized their limitations in only having 1 shard.
I believe that you're on the right track, because Harmony really suggests that there is, in his position of holding 2 shards but being one vessel, there is also a weird imbalance, which is creating perfect balance, and that inability
I think
to
that's
move.
specific to harmony, though.
Oh, exactly. I 100% agree. That is specific to harmony.
I wonder if a different person wielding two different shards would experience the same thing, or if their job would be a little bit easier. For example, I'll talk a little bit more about this theory in a later episode, but quick theory. Perhaps Dalinar takes odium and unites it with the pieces of honor that are in the Stormfather that he already has access to, and ends up with, like, I don't know, War Shard or something. And like, would that actually be better than just odium, pure emotion, or just honor, pure rules, no emotion? You know, like, putting them together, is that actually going to be a better, more productive, easier power to have and hold and wield?
I think that the exact circumstance that you're laying out may work out better than the shards that are diametrically opposed, like ruin and preservation.
Yeah.
But I think what we can maybe take from that letter, I believe it's from Frost, is that a lot of the shards, maybe including ones that we didn't see before Rhythm of War, decided to pair up because maybe they are not only attracted to that, but as you just described, like, the shards work better when they are in connection.
Yeah.
And not necessarily held by one person. Like, I think that this all could be an example of just like, they're doing the best thing that they can, and the best thing that they can is to be working together. And maybe give some credit to the shards, basically, is what I'm saying. Like, they created a bunch of worlds. They've been living around for a long time. There seems to be a lot of, advancement and progress and like cool species and stuff.
Who knows what ad nauseam times were like? Maybe it was way better. We don't know.
We really don't know, but we do know that it ended. And therefore, it's not perfect. It's not like a utopia. These people who were the OG vessels had some reason. We don't know what it was.
They could have been the villains. We don't know.
Exactly.
Maybe they were living in utopia and these people were just rude.
They were the ones.
This is why we can't have nice things
about the utopia. They were just like, oh, we do the same thing every day.
Why is life perfect?
Yes.
What is going to happen with Taravangian down the line? Possibly.
I think that he is now the Cosmere's big bad that we have in front of our face. And yes, we can keep speculating about like an autonomy character or another shard or whatnot, but Taravangian holding odium seems to me to be the biggest problem that the Cosmere is facing.
Well, okay. And here's the thing, because like I said at the beginning, I feel like Taravangian is just so complex, and I can never put my finger on if he really is just an evil mastermind, or if there are like some redeeming, sympathetic qualities to him, like, okay, I don't like all of the things that he's doing, but at least he has a good intent of like, I'm trying to save humanity, and sometimes I feel like that's true. Taravangian is saying, I want to save people, and that is the truth, and so, okay, I buy it. And sometimes I feel like he really is just an evil, psychopathic mastermind, and so when he ascends, I'm kind of like, maybe this will be good. He was just like crying on the floor of his room, like trying to do the right thing, and I want to believe in him. And then he ascends and he says a whole bunch of crazy shit.
I think your idea is backed up by some of the things that Cultivation says as well. Like, she clearly sees the good side of Taravangian that you are expressing exists. I am going to say, I'm just going to take the other side of that coin. Like, that's an easy one. You're picking Taravangian could be good. And I'm just going, Taravangian is bad.
Well, and like, Dalinar wants to see the best in him. And there's that whole moment where Taravangian is like, please prove me wrong, Dalinar.
Yeah, we'll hug it out in the end, basically.
Yeah, he does. He's like, we will embrace. And he's like crying. And you're like, oh, maybe he really is. Like, they don't agree, but that doesn't mean he's necessarily a bad person. And then this whole last part, this is another great example of not being able to trust anyone with power who you think you can trust. Because just like Hoyd, we've been sitting here like, oh, cultivation, she's so smart. She's just sitting there setting up all these great plans. And then she shows up and you're just like, ya dumb.
Oh, honey, I believe is what you said
Exactly.
to the ancient dragon.
Yes.
Oh, honey.
Because she shows up and she says, quote, Odium's power is the most dangerous of the 16. It ruled Reza, driving him to destroy. It will rule you too if you let it. End quote. And then at another point, she continues on to say, quote, you were heading in this direction. All I could do was hope that if you succeeded, my gift would work, that I had changed you into someone who could bear this power with honor. End quote. And so she has like so much faith that Taravangian is going to be, you know, a better vessel. And I really just think, I mean, she even says, bear the power with honor. Like, lady, I know you miss Tanavast and you guys were lovers and shit, but like, he's dead. Honor is dead. And Taravangian is not honor.
May I just say that honor still lives as long as he lives in the heart of men. So I hear the cultivation cry. Like, she is out there without her love, without honor in the world. And she's like, maybe Taravangian, I can push you in the right direction enough to help you out to be honorable because you have honor inside of you. And I respect the opinion of those who want to believe in the goodness. But I'm just going with her first quote, which is
Cultivation is
Odium's
straight tripping.
power is the most dangerous of the 16.
And you just put it in the hands of Taravangian?
I think it's a bad call. I think it's just a situation where they don't know what is going to happen. And I always believe, this is my personal bias, coming in right now, coming in hot, but I always believe that the people who are capable of the worst things believe deep in their heart that what they are doing is right. We're not going to get into historical discussions, but like every terrible person thought they were doing the right thing.
I don't think that's true. I think that Taravangian, his whole thing, why he's so confusing and I never know what's real, is because he is constantly lying to himself. I think he knows deep down that he is a psychopath that just wants to kill and destroy.
Okay.
But he can't like settle with that. And so he just tells himself, no, I'm not a bad person. I'm not a bad person.
You mean the rewriting of the diagram and stuff?
Yeah. Like all of the...
Explain that a little bit more.
So there's just so many times when he contradicts himself. Like, you know, if you go way back to like Way of Kings and Words of Radiance, he's like, I'm trying to save all of humanity on Rashar. And then he fails at that. He only saves Kharbranth. And in Rhythm of War, he's like, I saved Kharbranth. That's what I always wanted to do. I succeeded.
It's like whatever was possible or whatever he was doing was the thing that he always wanted to do.
Yeah.
Like he just slightly rewrote. So he's always the perfect hero.
Exactly.
Just like he was rewriting the diagram.
He's never failed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The diagram was
exactly.
always telling him to do exactly the thing that he ended up doing.
Yeah.
And it never was.
And the diagram was never wrong. They just like, he would just reinterpret it and just say, oh no, this is what it was always saying.
Dalinar was supposed to die until he wasn't supposed to die because Dalinar didn't die.
And it's not that the diagram is wrong. It's just that we have to look at it in a different way. But this is the way it's always been.
This is so similar to what we have been talking about. Like there were real people in the world who broke off from the diagram and were like, Taravangian is doing the wrong thing. And we didn't believe those. They were the outcasts. They were the weirdos. And we kept believing Taravangian. And like, what if it just take the thing at its face value? Taravangian was getting stuff wrong all the time. And
all the time.
Like you are saying, he is, because we see things from his perspective is always constantly rewriting itself.
Yeah. And so that's part of like my confusion about Taravangian, but I think it's because of that internal conflict. And so to come back to the beginning of this tangent, I think that he is actually a bad person who is continually lying to himself to make himself feel like a good person. but I think he's a bad person. And I think that becomes very clear after he ascends. And we get these few quotes. Quote, "But he did know his predecessor's plans and had access to some of his knowledge. So Taravangian knew the Cosmere was in chaos, ruled by fools, presided over by broken gods." He goes on to say, quote, "He was finally free of the frailties of body and position that had always controlled and defined him. He finally had the freedom to do what he desired. And now Taravangian was going to save them all." End quote. The most terrifying proposal to save everyone that I've ever heard.
It's not Superman. Like, this is not a situation when you're like, go for it, Taravangian.
Like, best case scenario, right? He ascends and is like, "Hey, Shard, you know this plan to like conquer the Cosmere? Maybe let's not do that. Let's like take a step back, bro." And instead he just leans into it real hard and is like, "I have a better way to take over the entire Cosmere. Don't scrap the plan. Bump it up."
I think there is that long-running show with a very handsome lead actor, Lucifer, when it's just the devil wants to take time off and is like tired of doing the whole devil thing. And he just goes out and like makes love to a bunch of pretty women and men, I think.
Okay.
And solves crime for some weird TV reason. And Taravangian could have gone that route. He could have just taken the power and the passion and just like gone on a Rasharian pleasure cruise, just up to the Reshi Isles and just hanging out. But no, he leaned in and went extra devilly. He was like, let's become more like the devil. Let's real push into the evils of this untamed fury.
Yeah. And even just like the sort of wording of it as like, now he's finally free to like kind of be who he's always been, basically. Yeah. You know, if we go with that premise that he's always been a bad person, just lying to himself, and now he doesn't have to lie anymore. He like now has the excuse, right, of like, "Oh, it's odium, not me. I can't help it."
From Taravangian's perspective, though, if we're inside of his head, as we have been in these scenes, I think he is always going to be saying to himself, falsely, but saying to himself, "I'm doing this for good reasons."
Yeah, I agree, but don't believe that person.
You don't have to believe that person, but I'm saying that's the danger here.
Because he's a liar.
I'm worried.
I'm getting so passionate about this. I feel the shard of odium.
That's exactly what it is. Odium reaches out and infects everything.
And then, of course, we end with Taravangian basically saying, "Oh, honey," to cultivation. Quote, "Oh, you wonderful creature," he thought. "You have no idea what you've done." End quote.
Taravodium.
Taravodium.
That is it. Like, that's where we're left until we get to the epilogue.
Oh my God.
When he messes over with our boy Hoyt. As we said at the beginning, we're going to do that in another episode. But Taravodium...
I want to scream at cultivation.
Yeah, Taravodium is right now, to me, most dangerous thing in the Cosmere.
Yeah.
And the biggest problem that I see is that we have multiple characters. Thydakar, Maraise. We know that Chris is running around too. We know the World Hoppers are all there. Rashar is in this weird position of being almost like the center of the Cosmere as a whole. And Taravangian is going to follow someone off-world. He's going to figure out some way to unlock the something or to manipulate someone to do the something. Yeah, and it's just like, obviously, I think Reza was basically more likely to stay trapped in the Rasharian system. And I think Taravangian, there is basically zero chance that he doesn't start to reach out to the rest of the Cosmere.
I'm not 100% convinced that like we're already in the end game. I'm not convinced that we know what's going to happen in the deal, and we'll talk about that more in our The Deal episode. Deal or no deal,
which is now the new title. My last thought on this topic is the question of what aspects of Taravangian the man now apply to Taravodium the shard holder. Is his quote-unquote boon and curse still applicable? are the inverse relationship between his intelligence and his compassion still continuing as a shard?
No,
Has
I
he
don't
left
think so.
everything behind?
Yeah.
Does he carry forward the lessons that cultivation clearly tried to teach him? Like, I think this is the big question going forward, is
here's
how
my
much
thought.
of Taravangian is still around?
I think that the boon and curse, or whatever it was.
Yeah, because this is a cultivation pruning, not a Night Watcher.
Cultivation's thing.
Mm-hmm. Well said.
I think that cultivation's pruning is kind of an add-on to Taravangian's spirit web. Like, sort of like a hemalurgy type thing. Like, it was sort of tacked on.
Yeah.
But I don't think it is an integral part that is going to stay with him as he ascends. Like, I think at this point of ascension, you know, all of the sort of physical, external, like extra stuff gets stripped away from the spirit web, right? So obviously no more body, a bunch of other stuff is going to slough off, I think, including cultivation's pruning. And all that is left is like the base spirit web of Taravangian that has now been merged with the power of the shard.
I think that you are 100%. No, I'm going to say I think you are 98% correct.
Okay.
Because I do believe that the body sticks around, as we saw with Ati and Laris.
Well, yes, but it is
basically non-functioning.
Yeah. Well, it's dead. It's dead in the physical realm. But it's
not there
with Taravangian.
I don't know where it is, but it's somewhere. And
it's dead in the house. I think that's specifically mentioned right before he ascends. He says, like,
he looks back.
Yeah, he sees Zeth with the sword in the house and Taravangian's like dead body. And he's like, oh, they're just going to think that I'm dead. Actually, hold on. Now that I'm thinking about this.
There it is.
I think it's Race's body.
There it is. Taravangian's body is with him somewhere.
Oh, this is like a Mother Mary Ascension type thing.
They're switching out,
right?
Swapping bodies.
Isn't that like a religious thing? I think, yeah, the Feast of the Ascension.
Well done.
They think that Mary's whole body just floated up to heaven.
And I believe what we saw with Ati and Laris is that somehow, some way, the body, the physical body, does stay with them when they are shards.
That is weird to me. Like, where is it?
It's in the nether.
There's
it's
just
in
a
the nothing.
Body, like
in nothing, in the spiritual realm, and it's being held there by the power of the shard and the vessel combined. But like that's why when Laris dies.
No, I think you're totally right. I just can't quite wrap my brain around it.
Of course, yeah, it doesn't make sense, obviously, because we're
like, how does a physical thing exist in a space that is not physical?
I only think it happens for the shard holders, maybe also Dawn shard holders, but like I only think it happens for the shard holders. But when Laris dies, it is like his consciousness as Fuzz is in a position on Scadrial, and then when he dies, the body drops from the nothing, the nether, onto that spot in the physical world. So it was like always hanging around him somehow. So I just think that Taravangian's body is still with him, even though I agree it's basically non-functioning and not purpose-built anymore. Yeah. But you're all welcome to think of that, just floating Taravangian body out there.
Ugh.
Anytime he shows up, there's just a hanging, floating Taravangian
No,
above.
I don't want. I don't like this thought experiment.
Let us know what you think. We're on Twitter. We're on Facebook. We're on Reddit. We have a YouTube page. We have a Patreon. Wow, things getting expansive up in here.
Yeah.
And we also have a Stormlight Archive explained badly.
Yes, we do. This one is from Daniel Nash. A man and his pet Stormcloud try and save the world from singing lobster people.
Wonderful. Singing lobster people is actually my new favorite description. People. We have so much coming up. More with Dalinar, more with Taravodium, more with all of our character breakdowns, and we are just going to go on a run now of more character-specific aspects from Rhythm of War.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch on the docket, so stay tuned, and as Tyler said, continue to let us know your thoughts and theories and ideas. Until next time, life before death,
Strength before weakness.
journey before destination.